What's up, guys? Ryan Schultz here from E39 Source. Today we're working on my 2002 BMW E39 540i, and we're doing the valve cover gaskets, or at least starting the valve cover gaskets here tonight. So this is a April 2002 540i with BMW's M62 TUB44 engine. This engine was used in the 740, in the 540, the X5 4.4. It will be extremely similar to the 4.6 version of this engine used in the X5 Alpina, and probably quite similar to the old 4-liter M60 V8 as well. And being a V8, we've got two cylinder heads, two valve covers here, and it's a real common issue on these BMWs. We see it all the time on the 540 and 740 and other models I mentioned here in the shop, that these valve covers leak. And they generally leak from the back. We call them the little half moons at the end of the cylinder head back there. And not very many people know how to seal that out properly. So the goal is to get that done here today. Now, these engines traditionally run very, very warm, 110 degrees Celsius. Now, I fitted a 90-degree Celsius thermostat in this car that's going to keep those temperatures lower and make anything made of rubber and plastic last all that much longer. So I'm hoping that we're not going to have to do this again in 4 years or 50,000 miles or so. So we'll start with a general overview of the job, followed by the required parts, followed by the required tools. So generally speaking, the valve cover gaskets on this are simply in between the valve cover and the cylinder head. Throughout many years, multiple thermal cycles or heat cycles, they get really dry, and some of the worst ones we've seen come apart like plastic. They're brittle, and if you bend them at all, they just break. It's rubber. It should be quite malleable and flexible, but heat, time, and exposure to oil all degrades them. So we'll be removing the upper engine cover here. We'll be removing the side coil pack covers. We'll be removing the coil packs as well. And then all of these 10mm fasteners that go around the valve covers will have to come off as well. On this side, we'll need to remove the air intake box, probably the intake boot, the mass airflow meter. We'll also be removing the cabin boxes, lower boxes, and the snorkels for those boxes, just to get more access to everything. So here tonight, my goal is just to get things torn down, and we'll be resealing things tomorrow during the day. Now, as usual, I'm going way overboard here, and in these boxes are brand new BMW valve covers that I'm quite excited to put on. Now, I've got three reasons for doing this job today. Number one is they are leaking. At least bank one is leaking. It's actively dripping off the back of the cylinder head. Many of those drips are landing on the exhaust manifold, which is then burning that oil, and you can smell it in the car, and I hate it. Thing number two is I recently replaced the coil packs, and the studs that hold the coil packs in are all stripped out, and someone had tried to glue them and JB weld them, and that's not a good solution. I'm aware that I can retap and time cert and do all that, but I've decided not to. And thing number three is visual. This looks absolutely terrible. These are not supposed to be brown, they're not supposed to be gold, and they're certainly not supposed to have all of their finish peeling off. At 120,000 miles, it's a shame that it looks so poor when the rest of the car looks relatively good and presentable. The problem is these things are made of magnesium. Magnesium off gases at certain temperatures and throughout thermal cycles. And when they're painted or powder coated, that gas has nowhere to go, so it just flakes up and bubbles through the surface. Now, I went to 3 powder coating shops and discussed painting or powder coating these existing valve covers, and they all said, we can do it. It's going to be a few $100. I want them for between 7 and 14 days. And the finish is not going to be perfect. You're going to have bubbles, you're going to have fish eyes, and it probably won't last very long. One shop went as far as to tell me that they really didn't want to do it because this metal is known to have corrosion hiding under the surface, and they're just real difficult and tricky to refinish. So for all the compounding reasons, I decided, well, they're still available. Let's get a new set. Of course, you do not need to do that. This is just for me. In one of these boxes, this one, I have put the additional items. So you don't need the valve covers, but I've got them. We'll get this open, and then we'll find the additional items that you will need to reseal the valve cover. Thing number one is a valve cover gasket for each cylinder bank, and they are different. These are manufactured by a company called L-Ring. You can buy the genuine BMW one for 4 times the price. You will receive an identical part. Please check the description in this video for the proper part numbers. So we've got 2, bank 1 and bank 2 of our valve cover gaskets. Then we'll need a total of 22 of these washers or grommets, and these are rubber. You'll need 16 of one type and 6 of another type. So here on the front, see these front 3 10mm. We need a thick one there, there, and there. Multiply that by 2 for cylinder bank number 1, and we're talking about 6 thicker washers. Then running down the side, we can see these lower bolts, 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's 4 more up top, so that's 8. Multiplied by 2 banks is 16, and those are a different part number as well. These, I am aware you can buy these from various OEMs. Those seem to leak. This is one of the items I like to go with genuine BMW on. They're a few extra dollars. For the amount of effort we're going to put in this, we want those. A bit optional, we have these gaskets here that go around the coil packs, and we'll be able to see those when we get these black covers off. I just figure with new valve covers, I'd like to refresh those as well. It's only a few dollars. And now we'll get a look at what a new BMW M62 valve cover looks like. Look at this. It's supposed to be silver. Who knew? It was supposed to look good. It was supposed to match the rest of the engine bay dressing under here. We've got silver here. We've got silver stripes, a silver roundel, silver stripes here, silver font. It's all supposed to match, not look like that. The valve cover part numbers are here. They are still available. No, they're not stupid cheap, but they are cheaper than refinishing and replacing the studs. And the studs are these guys that hold your coil packs in. It is cheaper to buy a new one than to go through all that. On to the tools. We're going to need a variety of 10mm sockets. I've got 1/4 drive, short and deep wells. I've got 3/8 drive, short and deep wells. I have 3-inch extensions. If I need more, I've got an entire box over there. We can get wrenches, ratcheting wrenches, wobbles, more extensions. Whatever we'll need is over there. I've just started to populate the cart like this. So I have a flex ratchet and 3/8, small 1/4 ratchet. It's a BMW. There's probably going to be some plastic fasteners somewhere, so I've got a pry tool, flathead screwdriver, 6mm nut driver, and the reason for that is it's just so much easier to turn these hose clamps with a nut driver than it is a screwdriver. 90-degree pick, because that'll be useful, and it's the end of the day. I know I'm going to drop stuff, so I've got a telescoping magnet. Add in a few power ratchets, power drills. That's just going to speed things up. Now, before we get to turning those 10mm fasteners, we've got to remove some of the prettiness here under the engine. And let's start off with this big plastic engine cover. We've got 4 push buttons here. We'll need to press those in while simultaneously pulling up 1/4 at a time. I will need a second hand for that, but if you do that, you'll be able to just lift this piece up. No, looks like we don't even have to do it at the same time. Just give that a little push. Same thing over here, and it will come up and off. So we'll put this somewhere safe, and now we can move on to the next pieces. Covering our coil packs, we have these black plastic trims, and if you look closely, there's a little square trap door here. It's got a little cutout down at the bottom. So I'm going to use my 90-degree pick, get in there, just pry up a little bit. Those are fragile. They're plastic pieces that have been through a lot of heat. So we'll pry those out, and that's going to reveal some 10mm screws below them. 10 mils are fairly long, and the electric ratchet made quick work of that. Now we're able to come over here and just start at one corner and pry them off and away from the engine, and then out. Those covers are off, so now we're looking at our 8 coil packs. Each one is held in with 2 10mm nuts and 1 electrical connection. To release the electrical connection, I'm going to use the pick tool, put it in right here, and just pull straight out. And that's as far as it goes, about 3/4 of an inch, and then we'll be able to just lift our connector off like that. Couple of small notes here. So we've got 1 grounding wire here on each cylinder bank, and that'll be on cylinders number 1, 2, and number 5, 6, number 7. So cylinders 2 and 7 have these grounding spades. And then kind of on the same cylinders, we've got these ground cables right here. And we're just going to take the eyelet, take it off, and then leave that down there for now. But once all the nuts are out, it's real easy to just grab our coil pack here and just pull straight back. It wiggles out. And some people like to label these. I don't see any point in that. They're all brand new. They're all the same. And this engine has no issues. If you are chasing issues or misfires or want to write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on each one, then go for it. But I'm not going to. With the coil packs out, we'll next need to remove our positive battery terminal right here. So you open that up and you'll be greeted with 2 Torx 25s, I believe. I'll run back to the tool cart, pick up some of those, and we're just going to remove those screws, probably leave them in the cap, get that closed up, and let this hang somewhere else. Just be careful that nothing touches that post and grounds it anywhere. You'll get a big spark. Before we get too far here, I'm going to jump into some easy work. I'm just going to remove the engine air intake box, mass airflow meter, and then our intake boot. And that can kind of come out in one piece. So we've got a 6mm or a flathead hose clamp here holding the boot onto the throttle body. The mass airflow meter is connected with 1 electrical connector here. You squeeze these tabs and rock the connector backwards. I'll need another hand. Then our air box is held in with one 10mm bolt here and a second 10mm fastener hiding right down there just inside the MAF. A few small notes here on the air filter housing and intake ductwork. So there is a little clip right here, and our MAF wire is supposed to be in there. Mine was not, but now that I know about it, it will be. Then we had two connections right here, right before the throttle body. And number one, you just squeeze at 12 and 6 o'clock here, and that presses the tabs out and it pulls out. And number two is a vacuum line, and mine has been off recently, so it pulled off easily. You might need some needle nose pliers or some rubbing alcohol as a lubricant for these rubber components, but that came off pretty well. So good time to get all this cleaned up now that it's out of the car. Inspect your filter in there, make sure that's good. And then small note, you've got a little rubber stopper right here and another one over here. You want to make sure that those either stay on your filter housing or they may get stuck in this little hole or here, so be sure to get those out and keep them with the air cleaner. Up next, we're going to do this for the millionth time. This will be removing the cabin boxes and air intake snorkels. So we start down here with a small tab, pinch the sides of the tab and wiggle it outwards. Grab the weather stripping, pull straight up like that. Then we'll remove our little door, lid, or cover for the housing. Then on the snorkel, there's 3 tabs. Use a screwdriver, use your thumb, whatever works, and peel those out like this. Now we've got one electrical connector there on the box that pulls off carefully. Then the entire box lifts up from the inside and comes out like that. Last, you'll take your intake snorkel, rotate it counterclockwise, and pull it out of the firewall like this. With the cabin and engine air intake boxes out of the way, we've really opened this area up. We've got lots of room to work. And before we can start removing our 10mm screws or bolts around the valve cover, we've got a bit more to do here on our electrical boxes for A, the coil packs, and B, our fuel injectors. And I've actually never done this on an M62 before, so let me consult the manual and we'll see what's next. Okay, so not too much in BMW TIS, but it's fairly straightforward. It's just difficult to access. So a few electrical connections clip on to this large black electrical box. I found it easiest to remove those first. So right here we've got one like this. It's got a spring tab. You press the spring tab in towards the connector and take the connection off. Then over here we've got it kind of looks like an oxygen sensor connector. It's this big guy here, and it just pulls straight out, and then you can get that out of the way, and that will help. Then we've got 2 10mm nuts on these studs here. So release the nuts, that will release this little bracket. And this had one more of those electrical connectors that has a bit of a spring tab on it like that. So with those out of the way and the nuts off, this thing is still tight, and that's because the electrical connectors for our fuel injectors, which we can just see in there, are still attached. And these are the 4 tiny little clips that you're going to need to use a 90-degree pick tool, such as that, to release the one side. Just get in there and pick it out. These are quite flexible. And then they're going to push down towards the spark plugs, towards the coil packs, and you kind of wrap it out and around the connector. I don't know that they have to come completely off, but you do need to release them because they're holding this box to the coil pack for the electrical connector for the injector. So with those 4 things off, maybe that took about 10 minutes, then you're able to pull the box straight back this way at the same 90-degree angle that the V of the engine is, and it's going to stay attached obviously by all these snorkels and wires, but it is mostly free now, and we can now access the rest of the valve cover. Here's a better look at the injector. That would be cylinder 1 right there. We do not have to touch the fuel rail. Where the fuel rail goes onto the injector, there's more tabs that you can see right there. You don't have to mess with those at all. We just have to get the electrical part disconnected. So I'm going to repeat all that here on cylinder bank 2, then we'll be ready to pull the valve covers off. On cylinder number 5 here, the first one on bank number 2, I'm going to try to get some video here of the clip that we're removing. So enter the pick tool. This is the easiest one because we have the most access, we can see it. And we're just going to grab the little clip like that and pull it down and away from the connector. Keep pushing it down until eventually it will kind of snap towards the other side. And if we were ready to remove this black box right now, it would pull off because that's released. And there's next to no access now. We've got other things in the way. This cylinder is going to need to come out. And with the nuts off of here, we're able to just pick this up. And we may want to disconnect a vacuum hose here or something, but we can just fold this out of the way and get better access to cylinders 6, 7, and 8. Bank 2 seemed a bit easier here for this electrical block. Have a little bit more access perhaps. I did remove this cylinder completely. I just pulled the vacuum line off the front end of it. I just replaced these, so it was pretty simple to do. If not, if you're planning on going into this and want it done in one day, I would just buy some 1/8" vacuum hose and have that on hand. That way you can just cut it to size and replace what's not fresh in here. So with that out of the way, I went ahead and removed all the 10mm bolts all the way around the perimeter. There's a total of 8 there along the coil packs and the 3 in the front. Some of them you can get the impact tools in there, some of them you can't. You have to go by hand. A couple here, they're not supposed to come out with the full stud. Where's an example of that? I think this. So we're gonna have to glue that stud in there and make sure that's torqued down right. Hopefully nothing's too washed out in the cylinder head. If not, we'll just helicoil it. But after that, there's nothing else holding these things on here, so you can just get a good grip. I use the oil cap. You probably shouldn't. It's not that tight, at least mine wasn't. Give it a little pull, same thing in the rear, and then they are completely loose like this. So at this point, we're going to want to kind of fold our electrical boxes in towards the center, get everything out of the way that we can. I do suspect bank 1 will be easier to remove than bank 2 just because there's fuel lines and additional brake lines back there near the reservoir and master cylinder. But you'll pretty much lift out away from the engine and then work them out of the car completely. So here are the 6 valve cover bolts that were in the front, and these are the ones that have the washers kind of press fit over this little flange. And the best way to get these things off is just to get a good sharp knife and very carefully slice them right like that. So you'll end up with 6. We're going to be replacing those 6, of course. I'm going to let these things soak in some degreaser overnight. And today's part of the project is just about done. Gotten things cleaned up in here a little bit. Aside from the mating surfaces, on the cylinder heads themselves, you're going to want to use a degreaser, a razor blade, whatever you find works best to remove any of the old gasket maker, any light corrosion, any goop, just anything there. We want a very clean and smooth sealing surface on both cylinder heads. So it's a good idea overnight if you have to leave it, put some towels over there, try to keep this as clean as possible. Don't leave it open in a dusty environment. It is best to do an oil change very promptly after a valve cover gasket job. I'd probably start it, let it run maybe 15 minutes, get that any sort of debris that fell in there down in the pan, and then just change the oil as it's warm. We're back here on day 2, and unfortunately we're not going to be resealing the valve covers today. Do stay tuned for those next clips. But in the meantime, we've got some additional maintenance to take care of here in the way of timing chains and guides. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. And we're back. Fast forward a couple of weeks here, waiting on parts, problems and delays, all sorts of stuff. But we've got new timing chains, guides, and everything that goes with that, rebuilt vanos, all the fun stuff. So getting back into the valve cover gaskets here, we've resealed bank 2. That's all done. Just wanted to familiarize ourselves with the process before we got too far. Here's our bank number 1 new valve cover, looking absolutely beautiful and mint. A refresher on the hardware, we've got 8 of these short ones, and we're replacing the little rubber sealing washers there. And then on the front, we have 3 long bolts. These are the ones we cut off with a knife before, and we just pop new ones on either by hand, or you can use a socket to just push that onto the bolt. I've replaced these gaskets here for the beauty covers around the ignition coils as well. So with a clean cylinder head here and a clean valve cover, we are ready to fit the cover on top of the cylinder head. And we had these oiling rails off and just replaced them and retorqued them. But if you're just in here and not doing any additional work, it's always a good idea to make sure these are down to 89 inch-pounds or 10 Newton meters. Just put a wrench on them and make sure that they're still tight. Those are known to kind of loosen up over time. So a few areas we want to prepare now with our gasket maker. And we're using Permatex Ultra Black gasket maker, which has worked very well for us. This bottle looks like it's been through it. And it has. So we're going to put a little bit of a bead right here where our front timing cover meets the cylinder head. We're going to do the same thing down here at the bottom, front timing cover to cylinder head. And then in the back, we call these the half moons behind the end of the camshafts here. And right here where it steps down into that half round, we want to put a little bead there, and then we just go ahead and go all the way down along the half moon, come out, and then go a little bit further. And there are 2 of those, one in each camshaft, your intake and exhaust. So we'll get that kind of smeared up and I'll give you a better look at what that looks like back here. Okay, we do not need an entire tube of sealant here. Just a little bit of a smear, not crazy thick. We're gonna look here at the back. This is probably a touch heavier than what's absolutely required, but this seems to be the most common place that they leak from. Here's our new valve cover with the gasket pressed in like this. If you have problems with it falling out on you, you can just get a bunch of long zip ties and kind of go through these bolt holes here to hold it in as you situate it. That's something we do more on S62s than M62s though. Then your gasket kit includes this inner one too, don't forget that. So at this point, we're ready to pick it up and lift it on there. We've got to take special care that these half moon pieces here in the back don't get pushed in, don't get pushed out. Use an inspection mirror, stick your head back there, get a friend to crawl under the car and look up there with a camera, whatever works. Just on the M62 here, there's really plenty of room. Just reach back here and you'll be able to feel it just sticking out like the rest of it here at the half moon. One more note here as it goes into place, we'll want to make sure that our grounding strap gets pulled out there and doesn't get pinched or sandwiched in between the valve cover gasket and the head. Ask me how I know. It takes about 15 minutes to get the bank 1 cylinder head cover on. A little bit more on bank 2, just because we've got all the fuel lines and vacuum hoses back here that are kind of in the way. Still certainly an easier operation than the S62 though, because we don't have those reluctor rings on the end of the camshafts. They're actually on the front and your cam sensors are up here. Once the valve covers are back in place, and these are torqued down to 89 inch-pounds or 10 Newton meters, you're able to go ahead and fit the coil packs. Make sure the studs line up with the holes in the coil pack, push them into place, replace those 10mm nuts, and those will go down to 71 inch-pounds. Then we've got 2 grounds, this one here to the block, and here for the coil rail. Just put them on whatever's closest, whatever stud is closest on top of the coil pack and of course underneath the nut. And then as you torque those down, you want to hold them so they don't clock too far and damage the wiring. Now we're ready to put on these fiddly little clips for the fuel injectors here. And our prongs, when facing this way on bank 1, are going to face up. And then it's kind of just going to wrap around the connector, similar to the way we took it off, and clip into place. Make sure it's all seated well from looking at the other side. There it is. And there it is. So now with all of those on, we're ready to line those up with the actual injector plugs. Give them a push and they'll all click into place. And I've done this a little bit out of order now, so I'll be sure to remember to attach this ground to one of these coil nuts. At this point, it's all simple reassembly. We've got 4 nuts that go down on our electrical boxes, remembering that we sandwiched the bracket for this guy right here in addition to our secondary air vacuum reservoir. Those nuts go down to 71 inch-pounds of torque. We've got a little bit of wire management here. For example, this wire here clips right there, and then our bank 2 cam position sensor wire clips in the timing cover in addition to our vacuum line to the air intake boot. We reinstall the air intake. We've got that 10mm bolt right down there in addition to a 10mm bolt over here. And then lastly, the beauty covers go on, 71 inch-pounds on those 10mm underneath the covers. And if you want to go that extra step, there are actually O-rings. So the metal sleeves that are in here that those 10 mils go through, there's tiny little O-rings on there. And it's certainly not required, but since I replaced those gaskets for the coil packs here, I did do those O-rings as well. So that should keep a really nice sealed and tight cavity for our spark plugs and coil packs. And a quick note for our battery door here, these Torx 25s go down to 44 inch-pounds. Those are just M5 threads, so not very much torque there. Hand tight would be fine. The last thing to do is reinstall the cover, which is quite simple. You just line it up and push down on those 4 pins. It'll clip into place. A quick important note on lower cabin box installation. As you reinstall these lower boxes, they go in the same way they came out, and you kind of hinge the outside in first. And there's just a few notes here. So there's 2 tabs that stick out of the windshield cowl, and those need to go through the cabin boxes. There's little cutouts there for them, and those are your hinge points for the door. More importantly, the windshield cowl comes down here, and it needs to sit on top of the lower cabin box here. And this is because water runs over the roof, over the windshield, down over the cowl. It needs to then dump out into the cabin box where it can make its way over here to this vent. And while you have the boxes out, inspect that vent, pull the little flapper back, make sure that's clean and clear. And then we've got another small vent here, a little elbow, and you can peel open that little door if that's all clogged up with debris. be sure to clean that out. You're best off to just put those suckers in the sink and let some water run through there. Take a brush to them if they're real bad. But that's the tricky part here. You just got to make sure it sandwiches underneath the cowl, so the cowl is dumping into the box, not the other way around. And that's it, a beautifully resealed M62, complete with timing chains and guides, and I didn't see that coming earlier in the video, but we went the full way. Did the expansion tank and the fan shroud, radiator hoses, water pump, had already done the thermostats, belts, and pulleys, but everything on the front of this engine is neat, clean, and new. Gotten about 100 miles on the car, checked for any sort of leaks from, at this point, anything, timing covers or valve covers. Everything's clean, no smells or any of that. Directly after the job, depending on how much oil or degreasers, cleaning agents that you used, it's possible that some of that leaked down onto the exhaust manifold. So when you started, it might just burn that off and smoke for a few moments, which was the case for me, but that should disappear very quickly. That's going to wrap up our M62 valve cover gasket job. If you're just doing valve covers, I would expect that to take about 4 hours, leaving ample time for cleaning and chasing bolt threads and things like that. Or if you're doing the timing chains and guides, add about 30 hours to that. If you live in Southern California and would like for our shop to take care of this job for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Send me an email, ryan@e39source.com. Be sure to check the video description for a full list of parts required for the valve cover gasket job. And I'll talk to you guys in the next E39 Source video. Thanks for watching.